If this found you today, it's because God is repeating something you've already felt deep in your chest. There is a person who keeps showing up quietly in your thoughts, in your prayers, in the most unlikely moments. And every time their name surfaces, it doesn't bring chaos. It brings peace. It isn't a quick rush that burns out. It's that soft, unmistakable sense of home without moving an inch. You've tried distracting your mind, crowding your calendar, but the signs keep knocking gently. A song that says exactly what the two of you carry, a comment from someone who doesn't know your story, a chance encounter that felt choreographed by invisible hands. God isn't playing with your heart. He's speaking with the kind of clarity he uses when he wants you to understand without fear. Maybe you've called it loneliness or fantasy, because a heart that's been hurt learns to protect itself by doubting even what is good. But there's a wide difference between obsession and confirmation. Obsession squeezes, hurries, and demands instant outcomes. Confirmation calms, organizes you on the inside, and gives you courage to take one step at a time. God is not the author of confusion. When he chooses to weave two stories together, he aligns the invisible first. He lets your spirit recognize the other before circumstances rearrange. That's why you find yourself interceding for this person as naturally as breathing. That's why peace arrives before the plan, and hope settles before the explanation. So breathe. This isn't the moment to force doors or to hunt for signs like needles in a haystack. This is the moment to listen more carefully, to trade proofs for presence, hurry for process. What God is building doesn't need a push, it needs space. Today we'll separate what consumes from what truly builds. The craving that suffocates from the purpose that gives breath. The anxiety that shoves from the peace that guides. And as we walk, you'll see this isn't merely about finding someone, but about recognizing God's hand, guiding two hearts at the same time. If this sounds like your story, stay with me and subscribe now. It's free, and it makes sure you receive each new confirmation at the right time, without missing anything God wants to align in your heart. Let's allow the signs to make sense, without noise, without fear, with a quiet confidence that heaven doesn't speak in riddles when it comes to true love. There is a quiet way God speaks about a person, and once you recognize it, you stop wrestling with yourself and begin to rest in him. It does not come wrapped in adrenaline or the frantic need to make something happen today. It arrives like morning light through the curtains, soft, steady, unmistakable. You are going about your ordinary life, and a name rises to the surface of your heart without effort. You pause, expecting the old tightness in your chest, but find the opposite. An ease, a warmth, a subtle assurance that doesn't argue or insist. The more you try to dismiss it, the more you discover that dismissal is noisy, while God's voice is gentle and yet impossible to ignore. Human confusion sounds like a crowd. Divine clarity sounds like a single note you keep hearing beneath the crowd, holding everything together. You already know the difference because you have lived it. Obsession drags your thoughts forward by the collar and demands outcomes. It pushes you to check your phone, to measure time in minutes and seconds, to grasp for certainty as if certainty were a product you could buy. Confirmation never grabs you by the collar. It sits with you. It slows your breathing. It invites you to pray for this person's well-being when there is nothing for you to gain from it. It doesn't ask you to perform or compete. It asks you to trust. And that trust has a texture you can feel. You walk into your daylighter. Your conversations with God shift from "prove it again" to "shape me for what you are shaping." Peace becomes the proof you stop arguing with. Sometimes the clearest thing God does is align what you sense with what you see. But he starts with the sensing. He lets your spirit recognize the connection before your circumstances learn its name. That is why certain moments feel choreographed, as if heaven arranged the timing with an artist's hand. You cross paths on a day you almost stayed home. A sentence you hear from a stranger answers a question you only asked in prayer. A song you never noticed before feels like it was written from the inside of your story. You could chalk it up to coincidence. You've done that before. But coincidence doesn't keep producing the same fruit. Coincidence does not leave you kinder, cleaner, more faithful. What God confirms will always pull you toward the person you are when you are closest to him. There is also a gentle education happening in you while all this unfolds. God is teaching you how to hear Him about matters of the heart without drowning in emotion. He is maturing your discernment so you can tell the difference between a desire that consumes and a calling that constructs. He is loosening the old knots, memories that taught you to mistrust, sentences spoken over you that made love feel like a risk you could not afford, and replacing them with something steadier. That steadiness is not apathy. It is devotion reordered. God first, then everything else finding its rightful place. When He is first, you no longer need to wrestle love into existence. You recognize what He is already breathing on. Clarity grows in environments where you give it room. That is why forcing does not work. Not with your own heart, not with other people, not with God. You can chase signs and miss the sentence God is already writing, or you can return to the simple practices that keep you receptive. Quiet your interior noise. Bring this person's name to God without bargaining. Ask Him to strengthen what is from Him and to dissolve what is not. Watch what remains after the rush. The feelings that fade when you stop feeding them were never confirmations. They were cravings. The sense that survives silence is the one to pay attention to. It will not shrink when you stop chasing it. It will stand there, patient and bright, like a lighthouse that does not care whether you're looking, because it was built to shine. You may worry that your heart is playing tricks because it has done so before. God is not asking you to deny your past. He is inviting you to let Him reinterpret it. The failures and false starts did not disqualify you from hearing Him. They trained your ear to notice the real thing. In the stories that hurt, you felt hurried, less yourself, easily unmoored. In what God is breathing on now, you feel gathered, more yourself, anchored. One story demanded that you abandon your convictions to keep the connection. This story deepens your convictions and makes you more faithful to who you are. Love that is born of God never asks you to betray your identity in Christ to preserve it. It becomes a companion to your calling, not a competitor. And there is this other sign that doesn't look like a sign at first. Your prayers change, not because you are trying to be noble, but because love, purified by God, turns outward. You stop asking only, "Is it them?" and begin to ask, "Make me ready." You pray for their peace on days you would rather claim your own. You bless their journey even when you cannot see where you will meet on the map. If this sounds small, it isn't. Heaven measures love by how it serves when no one is watching. A connection that makes you more generous with your intercession is already doing something holy in you. It is forming the kind of heart that can protect a promise when the weather changes. You do not need to memorize a formula to stay in the clarity God provides. You only need to keep returning to the place where His voice is most audible and your fears are least persuasive. You will know you are there when peace keeps winning the argument, and you no longer need a sign every morning to remain certain by nightfall. That is how God speaks about a person. He is joining to your story, not by turning you into an investigator, but by turning you into a witness of His wisdom, His timing, His unfailing goodness, and the quiet miracle of two paths learning the same rhythm. When that rhythm is set, you do not rush it. You walk it. There comes a moment when the quiet assurance inside you begins to overflow into things you can actually see. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives the way dawn takes a room. First a hint, then a glow, then a light you can't deny. You notice the name that rises in prayer no longer drags worry behind it. You stand in the kitchen or sit at a red light, and a stillness settles over you that feels like being held. You don't have to manufacture hope. It finds you while you are doing ordinary things. And when you bring this person before God, you don't bargain or beg. You simply rest and say, "Do in us what only you can do." That rest is not passivity. It is trust maturing. It is your heart learning the difference between pushing a door and watching it open. Then life begins to echo what your spirit already knows. A conversation you weren't supposed to have happens anyway. A timing you couldn't have planned lines up with a grace you couldn't have earned. Something that would have terrified you a year ago now feels strangely safe. You catch yourself smiling at how simple it is when you stop trying to choreograph every step. The coincidences stop feeling like coincidences because they keep bearing the same fruit. You are kinder, steadier, more faithful, more yourself. Love that comes from God does that to a person. It doesn't turn you into someone else. It returns you to the best of who you are when you are close to Him. In that environment, your prayers change shape. You stop pleading for outcomes and start blessing a journey, yours and theirs. You ask for courage where there was fear, for patience where there was hurry, for purity where there was performance. You find yourself interceding not for a shortcut, but for the strength to walk at God's pace. You bless their mornings without needing a reply. You release their evenings without trying to control the script, and in that releasing, something loosens inside you too. The old habit of gripping, the old story that love survives only when you force it to. What survives now is what God sustains. Little by little, the outer world begins to reflect that interior order. Doors you once rattled gently open. Conversations flow without rehearsal. You discover that peace is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the presence of God in the midst of it, teaching you to recognize His fingerprints without demanding explanations. The more you accept this, the less you fear the unknown. The unknown stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a hallway lit one step at a time. And when doubts try to rehearse their lines, you answer with what you've seen and what you've learned. The peace that stayed when excitement faded. The alignment that needed no shortcuts. The grace that kept showing up where your effort finally let go. That is how the invisible starts showing up, quietly, consistently, faithfully, until your life and your spirit are telling the same story. There is a rhythm to the way heaven repeats itself when it wants you to finally believe. It begins as a whisper you could dismiss, becomes a melody that follows you into the kitchen and the car, and then turns into a soundtrack you recognize, even in crowded rooms. You think of this person at an hour that used to be noisy inside you, and the old panic does not come. Instead, there is a low, steady peace that feels like being guided by a hand you cannot see. You go about your day and the world starts speaking in the same key. A sentence from a stranger mirrors last night's prayer. A snippet of a song names what your heart has been carrying. A chance meeting lands in your lap the very week you asked for clarity without drama. The repetition is not there to exhaust you. It is there to educate you, to teach you the grammar of God's guidance, until your spirit can read it without squinting. Dreams, too, change their texture. They stop being the restless montage of your anxieties and become scenes drenched in a quiet certainty, the kind that lingers after you wake up. You open your eyes with that calm that does not need decoding, as if heaven stamped your soul with a yes that does not shout. And while your dreams are settling you, your prayers are enlarging you. You find yourself carrying this person before God with a tenderness that expects nothing in return. You bless what you cannot control. You speak life over a future you cannot schedule. Intercession becomes less about outcomes and more about alignment, less about make it happen, and more about make us ready. That is what divine repetition is doing in you, forming a heart that can hold a promise without squeezing it to death. There is also this quiet alignment of paths that requires no choreography on your part. A day you almost canceled becomes the day your eyes meet across a room and the air doesn't rush. It rests. Words flow without rehearsal. Laughter comes without effort. Even silence carries ease. It does not accuse or demand. It simply lets you be. You notice that being near this person does not pull you away from God. It draws you closer. Your convictions feel stronger, not compromised. The person you are becoming in this atmosphere looks more like Jesus and less like the version of you that hustled for approval. Love that is born of God does not negotiate away your soul to keep its thrill. It deepens your soul so the thrill has somewhere holy to live. And then God begins using other voices to underline what He has been saying to you in secret. People who don't know your private prayers make offhand comments that land like confirmations. A mentor says, "I don't know why, but I see grace on this." and something inside you exhales. Family members, once skeptical, start softening, and the conversation shifts from explaining yourself to simply sharing what God is doing. No one is pushing the story forward, yet the story keeps moving. That is the mark of divine authorship. You are not dragging the narrative uphill. You are walking a path that keeps greeting you with open gates. Even the practical pieces begin to hum in the same key. The talks you use to avoid about future, money, calling, or family do not feel like negotiations. They feel like discovery. Values line up without coercion. Differences do not threaten the bond. They give it texture, the way two instruments create harmony, not by being identical, but by knowing when to take the lead and when to hold the note beneath. You sense that together you would not merely be happy, you would be useful, and usefulness, in the kingdom sense, is joy-wearing boots. It gets things done that matter. If fear tries to stage a comeback, it will do so with familiar lines. What if you're imagining? What if you're wrong again? But the repetition of peace out-argues the repetition of fear. You remember how anxiety demanded constant spectacle, another sign, another rush, another guarantee, while true confirmation returned you to the same three anchors every time. A peace that doesn't wobble, a timing you couldn't orchestrate, and a growth that makes you truer to who God is forming you to be. Those anchors have carried you through enough days now that doubt has to fight on a field it no longer owns. This is how God multiplies confirmations without turning you into a collector of omens. He gathers your attention, settles your interior, and then lets the outer world echo what the inner world already knows. He teaches you to distinguish the noise of longing from the signal of calling. He matures your love until it stops asking, "How do I get this?" and starts asking, "How do I steward this if it is from you?" And as that prayer becomes your posture, the need for constant spectacular signs fades, not because God is speaking less, but because you have learned His voice well enough to walk by it. There is a turning point in this journey when your prayers stop sounding like investigations and start sounding like invitations. You no longer interrogate heaven for proof. You invite heaven to shape you for what it is sending. Something subtle shifts inside. The fear of being wrong gives way to the desire to be ready. You wake with a quieter kind of courage, the kind that doesn't need a date on the calendar to keep moving. Because peace has become your compass, and peace is stubborn in the best way. It keeps directing your steps towards steadiness, away from the frantic habits that once tried to keep you safe, but only kept you small. Preparation begins in places no one praises. How you tend your inner life when no one is looking. How you treat your body and your time. How you guard your words when you're tired. How you respond to disappointment without letting bitterness draft your next decision. Love that is born of God is not fragile, but people can be, and preparation is how God strengthens you, so the weight of blessing does not become a burden. You notice the old narratives trying to re-enter, stories that say you are too much or not enough, and instead of wrestling them in public, you take them into prayer until they lose their power. This is holiness in everyday clothes, letting God author your interior so you don't ask another person to heal what only grace can touch. As your interior clears, you find a new honesty about motive. You can finally say to God, "I want this," without pretending you don't, and also, "I want you more," without pretending that costs nothing. Desire and surrender stop fighting each other and begin to work together, like breath and heartbeat. You are no longer bargaining for outcomes. You are making room for character. The patience you use to perform becomes patience you actually possess. The kindness you offered to be chosen becomes kindness you offer because you were chosen first by Him. This is what readiness feels like. Not perfection, but integrity. Your insides and your outsides telling the same truth. Preparation also looks surprisingly practical. You start clearing space in your life the way you would clear a room to welcome a guest you love. You pay attention to finances, not from fear, but from honor. You set healthy boundaries, not to punish anyone, but to protect what God is growing. You practice listening without planning your reply. You learn to disagree without setting fire to the bridge. It is quiet work, almost invisible, and yet it changes the atmosphere around you. People feel safer in your presence because you have made peace with yourself. And safety is the soil where love can actually grow. There is a humility that rises with this kind of preparation. You no longer need to audition for your own future because you understand that what is truly yours will not require you to erase yourself to fit. You can celebrate others without thinking celebration is a shrinking of your portion. You bless the person on your heart without trying to script their steps because you trust the God who is guiding yours. This humility does not make you smaller. It makes you spacious. It gives love room to breathe when it arrives, room to be real, room to mature into the partnership that serves more than just two people's happiness. In time, the readiness inside begins to echo in the world outside, not because you forced anything, but because alignment always finds the path of least resistance. The conversations that matter are no longer delayed by fear. The silences that used to ache begin to heal. Opportunities appear that would have overwhelmed you before and now feel right-sized. You realize preparation was never a waiting room. It was a forming room. And formation is how God answers prayers we didn't know how to ask, by making us into the kind of people who can carry what we asked for, without losing who we are. When preparation replaces doubt, you stop living on the edge of if and begin walking in the center of when. Not because you know every detail, but because you know the one who does. And that knowing steadies your hands for whatever comes next. There comes a day when peace stops being only a feeling and becomes a direction. It is subtle at first, the way your chest stays steady while you compose a simple message, the way your mind no longer rehearses 1,000 outcomes before you speak, the way your hands don't shake when you say what is true without dressing it as strategy. You are not trying to make anything happen. You are honoring what God has already been growing inside you. It is the difference between chasing a door and walking through one that has already swung open. You sense that the same grace that settled your heart is now inviting your feet to move, not with hurry, but with holy ease. This is where courage learns good manners. It doesn't crash into a life that is not ready. It knocks, and if the room is prepared, it will know by the way the air lifts. Your words come out clear, light, and clean. No pleading, no performance, no "prove this to me." You state what you see, you bless what you cannot control, and you release the moment to breathe. The action you take is simple enough to be sincere and strong enough to be seen. A check-in that carries kindness, an apology where pride once lived, a conversation that names hope without demanding deadlines. When faith takes a step, it leaves room for the other person to take theirs without pressure or fear. You start to recognize that real timing does not bruise. When heaven is aligning two paths, movement feels like relief, not strain. The conversation you postponed for months unfolds without you clutching at it. Laughter returns to places where you once only planned. Silence becomes soft instead of sharp. Even disagreement doesn't frighten you anymore because you are no longer negotiating your worth in every exchange. You can hear "not yet" without translating it as "never," and you can hear "I'm afraid" without translating it as "I don't care." That freedom is what turns action into worship. You are obeying God, not anxiety. In this season, clarity grows best in honesty. You do not pretend indifference to look wise, and you do not perform intensity to look brave. You simply let your life tell the truth. You show up when you say you will. You keep your words small enough to carry and large enough to matter. You invite counsel where you once hid, and you bring your questions to God before you bring them to a screen. The more you practice this, the more you notice something beautiful. The person on your heart begins to relax around you, not because you are perfect, but because your peace is not a performance anymore. It is the river you came in on. There will still be moments when fear tries to laminate your tongue. Old instincts will offer you their familiar scripts: delay until it dies, dramatize until it explodes, disappear until the ache dulls. But you have learned another way. You pause, breathe, and ask, what is the most honest, least controlling step I can take right now? And then you take that step, trusting that obedience is never wasted, even if it is quiet. You do not need a grand gesture to prove you believe. Sometimes the holiest act is a gentle knock, and the humility to accept whatever answer comes, knowing that God is shepherding both hearts, not only yours. Soon you discover that action taken in peace has its own fruit. Doors that are not yours to enter stay shut without wounding your hope. Doors that are yours ease open and hold. The friendship deepens without guilt. The respect grows without bargaining. Attraction matures into affection that knows how to listen, how to wait, how to serve. And somewhere in the midst of ordinary days, errands, work, worship, rest, you realize you have crossed an invisible line. You are no longer auditioning for love. You are partnering with God to steward it. That is what it means for faith to take a step in God's timing. You move, but you do not push. You speak, but you do not spin. You love, but you do not lose yourself. There is a holy moment, quiet, almost shy, when the signs you have gathered stop feeling like puzzle pieces and start feeling like a doorway. You do not rush it. You stand there and realize the same peace that carried you through long nights now stands like a pillar beside you in daylight. The repetition of God's whispers has done its work. Fear has less vocabulary. Hope has more oxygen. And love no longer sounds like a dare, but like a calling. You can finally say with a calm that is not borrowed, "What God has begun, He will finish, and I will meet His timing with a faithful heart." It isn't the end of waiting. It is the end of wandering. Your yes belongs to Him first, and because of that, it is safe to offer it when He asks you to. What unfolds next is rarely cinematic. It is better. It is the ordinary becoming saturated with meaning you do not have to manufacture. A message that used to take hours to compose is true in a sentence. A conversation that once required armor now requires only kindness. A plan that depended on perfect conditions yields to a trust that blooms in imperfect ones. You notice how God has braided your growth into theirs, how your reverence for His pace creates room for their courage, how their honesty invites your tenderness instead of your defenses. This is the fruit of confirmations handled with humility. Two stories learning to walk together without stepping on the grace that brought them this far. If delays remain, and sometimes they do, you do not accuse the silence anymore. You treat it as a sanctuary where God finishes what He started in both of you. You bless what is not yet by remembering what already is, the peace that did not leave, the alignment that did not demand, the faith that learned to move without pushing. You are not waiting like a beggar at a locked gate. You are waiting like a steward in a lit house, tending what is in your care, ready for the knock you no longer fear. This is how promises become paths, not with spectacle, but with a steady obedience that keeps saying, "Here I am," while God keeps saying, "I am with you." So receive this closing as a benediction over everything your heart now carries. May you keep the quiet that taught you to hear God's voice and the courage that taught you to answer it. May your love be the kind that makes you truer to Christ, kinder to yourself, and safer for the one entrusted to you. May your steps be gentle and your conviction firm. May the doors meant for you open without bruising your hope, and may every not yet be protected from the lie of never. May your story, however it twists and ripens, be recognizable as something only God could write. Thank you for giving me the honor of walking this stretch with you. If what you heard tonight felt like home, keep it close. Let it anchor you in the days when feelings waver and facts have not caught up to faith. I'm cheering for you as you move with peace, prepare with wisdom, and love without losing yourself. Until we meet again, go in grace, rest in His timing, and may your next yes be as calm and brave as the God who asked for it.